Let's take a look at the novalidate attribute. The novalidate attribute prevents forms from running their validation logic when the form is submitted. In other words, it always lets the form submission process go through regardless of what the results of validation logic would normally be. Now, why would you want to do something like that? Well, one main use of this is to allow a user to save a form's state so they can continue later without having to first validate all the entries. So if your website, for example, is having the user fill out a form and the user wants to be able to save their progress, you can disable your form's validation logic and let them submit the form and continue on later without having to force them to validate everything first. There's two attributes actually that enforce this behavior. If you want to use novalidate directly on the form tag, you can just use the novalidate attribute right on the form itself. You can also do this on a per control basis. So for example, if you wanted a certain button to allow the user to save the form without causing form validation logic, you would put the form novalidate attribute on that control. So let's go see how this works in code. So here we are in the code. This is my novalidate start example right here. And I've got my snippets file open. So let's take a look. I basically have a form with 3 fields, and I have a submit button and a save button. And let's go back and take a look at the source. You can see down here that one of these fields is required. So if I try to submit this form without a value in that field, it's going to fail. So let's go ahead and save this, and let's go to the browser. So I will bring this up in Opera, which supports this attribute. And I'm going to go ahead and try and submit. And you can see that I'm getting an error that says, hey, this is required. So what I want to do is be able to have the user enter some data and be able to submit this form without having to forcibly validate everything. So let's go back to the code. And the first thing I'm going to do is put the novalidate attribute on the form. So now let's go back to the browser and we'll refresh. And now you'll see that I can put values in these fields, and when I submit, the fact that I've got no value in that field is no longer a problem because the validation logic has been bypassed. But that may be a little bit heavy-handed, so let's see if we can get some finer grained control. Let's go back to the code again. And I'm going to take novalidate off the form. And I'm going to put the form novalidate attribute down here on the save button. So the submit button will still submit the form with validation logic. The save button will submit it without form validation logic. So let's save, and let's go back to the browser. Now I'm going to refresh. Now you can see if I put values in here but leave the first name blank, if I try to submit, that's a problem. But if I click the save button, it works just fine. Now, unfortunately, the no validation attributes are not fully supported in other browsers just yet. Opera supports them. Other browsers are beginning to support them, but right now, Opera is the only production one that supports it. And there's really no script library that fixes this just yet. So right now, this is one of those features that's only available currently in Opera, but hopefully coming to other browsers soon.